This is the behind the scenes at Digital Eclipse panel. My name is Chris Kohler. I'm editorial director at Digital Eclipse. Digital Eclipse is a video game development studio that actually started in 1992 in Emeryville, California, right across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco. We are still there. We literally were still in the same building for a long time, but we finally got out of there and moved about a block down to another building. And let's see what else. So in 1994, here I can almost kind of do this and like show you on my phone. In 1994, Digital Eclipse released its first game product. We had done some like productivity type software for the Mac. Nobody remembers it, but it's like Zounds and Diskmaster and things like that. And so in 94, Digital Eclipse put out its first game product. And these were, they were called Williams Digital Arcade. And I don't know if you remember Williams Digital Arcade games for the Mac. Some people are nodding their heads. Great. Those, they came in boxes that actually looked like arcade cabinets. It was Joust and Robotron and Defender. And those were actually the first like commercial products to use emulation. And the important thing about that is that, you know, prior to that, if you were to buy like, you know, Microsoft Arcade or something like that, you know, what you would get is a version of Pac-Man that somebody sat down, maybe looking at a Pac-Man arcade machine, maybe not, you know, and then they sort of recreated a version of Pac-Man. But what Digital Eclipse did in 94 was, you know, actually put out commercial products that were actually using emulation to give people the actual arcade games, you know, living again on their computer at home. Now, this is very commonplace. This is how you re-release games. But at the time, it was kind of a revelation. And, you know, moving on from that, what Digital Eclipse really wanted to do was to, like, treat classic video games like the works of art that they were, treat them with more respect in that way. So it started out as, well, hey, what if we actually let people play the actual work of art that somebody made instead of having somebody else come in and try to recreate it? And then it became more like, if we're going to put out things like Atari Anniversary Collection on the PC or PS1, what if we included interviews with the people who made the games, stories about the games, a photograph of the original arcade cabinet, or a scan of the manual? And since then, you know, Digital Eclipse lasted in that incarnation for a while. And then then it merged with other companies to form companies like Backbone, if you've heard of Backbone, or Foundation 9, which is at one point, you know, it was like many developers merging together to form this very big independent game development organization. And then in 2015, Digital Eclipse came back, and Digital Eclipse, the brand, was revived by the original founder, Andrew Eyre, and our current studio head, Mike Micah. And the idea was, let's bring that Digital Eclipse brand back, which was so associated with classic games, you know, and relaunch it as, you know, classic games at a higher level. You know, again, just continuing to treat classic games with more respect. Early products included Mega Man Legacy Collection, Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, in the sort of retro, still in the retro collection kind of a vein, but, you know, trying to do more, trying to really like focus on the restoration of those games, making sure that they really appeared as they were. I jumped ahead a little bit because in 2020, after the release, it was right after the Samurai Showdown collection came out. That's when I joined Digital Eclipse. I actually had about a 25-year career in the media prior to that. I started writing game reviews in, if anybody remembers the magazine On America, which was done by Viz Publications. It was a Japanese anime magazine, but I was doing a lot of the game coverage there in '96. And then for a really long time, I was an editor at Wired. I founded Game Life, which was Wired's video games blog. And then in 2020, moved over to Digital Eclipse, and had known those guys for a while, and had really thought like, gee, this seems like a great opportunity to like jump out of the media business, which is sort of on its way down, and get into the game development industry, which was hopefully on its way up. Following that, just sort of referencing this for myself. Yeah, so. The first thing that I worked on was Blizzard Arcade Collection. And again, what game publishers kind of tended to want. The folks at Digital Eclipse and I, had a lot of ideas for like how we could really change how you interacted with, how we presented classic games. Actually, really the first thing that I started working on was that we were going to do a re-release of Jordan Mechner's first game, Karateka. Jordan Mechner was the creator of Prince of Persia. And his debut game was called Karateka. It was a fairly simple game where you're sort of walking from left to right as a a nameless karate guy. The crazy thing about this was that Jordan had used Karateka to really pioneer a lot of the techniques that would then go into Prince of Persia. But a lot of people had kind of forgotten about Karateka, and what we were able to do with Karateka, and the reason we were able to do it is typically with retro collections, things of that nature, Digital Eclipse's products. What would happen is a game publisher would say, "Hey, we've got we have these old games in our catalog. Would you like to do a collection of these games for us? You do the development work, hand it off to us. We pay you a flat amount of money, and then that's kind of the end of the transaction." What we really wanted to do was the Digital Eclipse would be able to go out and kind of flip the script on this and go out and license things and say, "Hey, we would like to do a version of this that we think is really cool. So how about we pay you money, to license your game, and then we sell it." It obviously would work out, theoretically would work out better for us if we were to be able to do it that way. And so we had gone to Jordan and said, "Well, we want to do this for Karateka because we know it's got a great story behind it." The other great thing is that Jordan Mechner, turns out that he saved absolutely everything. And so, again, I really wish I had a cool presentation to show you right now. But what Jordan did with Karateka is he wanted to hand animate the karate guy walking across the screen, but he kind of struggled with it. He wasn't an animator. He was a brilliant Apple II programmer, and his father, Francis Mechner, who was he was a behavioral psychologist, and he was a serial entrepreneur who started a whole bunch of companies kind of using what he had learned in academia. And he wasn't a video games guy at all, but he saw Jordan kind of struggling, and he said, the old animators like Max Fleischer, those guys, they used a technique called rotoscoping, where they'd film a human being, and then they'd sort of trace, the frames of animation. That's how they'd get like human motion in an old cartoon. You should consider that. And Jordan said, "Yeah, let me go. I'll go film, my karate teacher doing moves." And so he took a Super 8 camera, and he films his karate teacher, and he comes up with this elaborate method of getting the film frames onto an Apple II. And that was, summing it up really quickly, taking the film frames, putting them into an old movie editing device called a moviola that would sort of advance the frames one by one, let you hold on a frame. This is what people would use to edit films, right? Hold on one frame of film, and you take a little sheet of tracing paper, put it over the little screen in the moviola, trace with a just like painstakingly trace with a pencil the movements. And he got all the karate movements, and then he realized he needed somebody running, and he needed somebody climbing, because at the beginning of Karateka, somebody's climbing on a cliff. And he turned to his dad, roughly the same height as the karate teacher, and he actually had his father, Francis Mechner, run around in the woods behind their house in Chappaqua, in upstate New York. And he filmed him. And Jordan saved all of this stuff, all this procedure. It actually worked. I mean, that's the crazy part, that it actually worked. He was able to do rotoscoping on an Apple II. And he saved all the materials. Most game developers threw it in the garbage, figuring nobody's going to want any of this stuff. Jordan was very, history-minded even at the time. And so what we had access to with Karateka, and I kind of realized coming in, I was like, damn, like, we've got, the film, which fortunately, again, Jordan donated all this stuff to, the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York. Jordan had donated the film and the tracing paper and all of this stuff to the Strong, which had preserved it and also digitized it. And when they digitized the film, the important thing is they did it the right way, and they really had it professionally done. And they provided me with a video, like an uncompressed, video of the film of his dad running around in his wife's karate outfit, because Francis Mector was the only member of the family that wasn't actually taking karate classes, apparently, at the time. The video they gave us was every frame of the video. If I sort of took it into Adobe Premiere, went frame by frame, every frame was a frame of the film. It wasn't sort of compressed in that way. And so I'm like, okay, I've got frames. I can export frames. I've got Jordan's tracing paper. And the key to this whole thing was that if you look at our release, The Making of Karateka, which we released last year, you can go through all of this, and you can see that when Jordan did the tracing paper, he would also draw not only the animation of the figure, but he'd draw like the tree that was in the background at the time, because they shot it all in the woods. And I realized, oh my God, I'm actually able to take the tracing paper, which the Strong scanned every frame of that, and I was able to take the film, and I was able to figure out what tracing paper goes with what frame of film. And I took that all into Photoshop and laid it over each other in layers. And I'm like, oh, and it's like it actually works. And then came the floppy disks. And Jordan had saved all his floppies, and the guys, the Internet Archive, like Jason Scott, those guys, they had gone and they had pulled all the data off the floppies. But all the data on the floppies was just files, and like each file was just like all the data off of one Apple II disk. So, and one of my coworkers, it was actually Jason Cirillo, who was working on this project with me. He actually just recently did the game Tetris Time Warp that's included in our recent release, Tetris Forever. Brilliant guy. He was like, oh, here's this program. It's called Cider Press, and it lets you open up an Apple disk on your Windows PC and then see what the contents are, and then if it's something that can be viewed, you can kind of try to view it. I'm like, okay, great. So I just start opening up disk after disk, and a lot of it's not anything that really makes sense to me, but what Jordan was doing was he was like drawing scenes and sprites and things like that and saving them out to formats that I could still read. And so I open up a random file, and at first it's like, oh, I don't know what this is. But then, I'm reading. So Jordan, again, he kept a journal of everything as well. He kept a journal of every day that he worked on Karateka and Prince of Persia. He wrote down what he did that day. And so now that's another part of this whole thing. I'm looking at that, I'm going, well, okay, now I'm looking at this file on a floppy or a piece of tracing paper, a piece of film, and I know the day that he did it. So now we have a chronology sort of happening. And if you think about what this is all to say is, if you think about a retro collection, so we did Ninja Turtles Cowabunga Collection, and in that we had, if you go into Turtles Cowabunga Collection, a product that is, I'm very proud of, but it's a retro collection. And a retro collection is, you open up the main menu, and it's like, okay, you got games, you got bonus materials, and then you got, options. And when you go into the bonus materials, it's like, okay, here are some bonus materials. Here's some scans of the original game boxes. Here's some design documents. Here's some scans of magazine ads. And you look at the gallery, which we, again, went nuts and made those galleries very detailed, but it's not telling you the story of how these Ninja Turtles games were made. It's giving you a lot of cool stuff to look at. What we really wanted to do with Karateka was let's really use all this material that we have to tell a story. And as I'm looking at the discs, these weird, sprites that I'm looking at, once I read the journals and I understand how Jordan put it all together, it's like, oh, these are when he took the tracing paper and he put them into an old piece of tech called a Versa writer, and it was like you put the paper in, and then it had a sort of a mechanical arm. It hooked up to the Apple or an Atari computer, and then you moved the mechanical arm around on the drawing, and it rendered that out as sprites on the computer. And so they looked bad. And so then he had to take the sort of bad sprites and go in and clean them up. And that's what you see in the game. But when I looked at that on the floppy disk, I understood what it was. And I had that power to understand what that was because I knew how Jordan had put the game together because he had documented everything. What I realized we had with Karateka was a chronology. we could tell you the full story of start to finish. And so that's what we did with the Making of Karateka. When you, everything is set up on a series of timelines. If you played Atari 50th Anniversary Celebration, you can also sort of see this. And everything is set up in this series of timelines where in a retro collection, it would be like, here's the video games. You know, that main menu experience of games, also some other stuff. With Making of Karateka, it's like, here's a baby picture of Jordan Mechner. You know, here's a picture of the house that he lived in. Because, you know, we wanted to set up this idea that, and here, it's not just that it's cool. The idea behind it is, you know, video games are made by people. We understand this, right? You know, video games are made by people. But, you know, video games are made by certain people with certain perspectives and certain things that happened in their lives and certain people that they knew. And then the game that emerges out of that has that person's stamp on it. You know, it doesn't matter if it's Karateka or anything else. Like, this is something that somebody really personally worked on. And so much in the game industry, or when we go out and, you know, 99% of the video games that are kind of like on the show floor here at the SEC Gamer Expo, you know, we buy it and we play it and we enjoy it. And we don't even think about, well, who made this and what was going on in their life that they made this game. And when you start to look at that kind of stuff, you pull out some interesting stories. And like, that's what we found with Karateka. That's certainly what we found with the follow-up to that, which was Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story. You know, taking a look at Jeff Minter, legendary British game developer. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s in the British, you know, game scene, you've heard of Jeff Minter. If you've heard of him and you grew up in America, you probably first heard of him when like Tempest 2000 came out for the Jaguar. But the thing is, he had done dozens of games prior to Tempest 2000. And if you look at who was Jeff, why was he making these games, what did he do when he was making all these games prior to Tempest 2000, then you look at Tempest 2000, you're like, oh, I know where this came from now. I understand why somebody did a weird, you know, sort of like, you know, spin-off or evolution of an old Atari arcade game, gave it trippy graphics, gave it light synthesizer sort of effects on it, because if you see everything else that he did, you understand where that came from, and you understand why this person was going to be the person who was going to make this. And so again, when I was doing Blizzard Arcade Collection, and that was the first product that I worked on, we actually like released, you know, we sat down for meetings with Blizzard, and Blizzard, I'm like, hey, I want old photos. I want like vintage photos from this time, because it was the earliest days of Blizzard. And, you know, our contact was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go through these photos and I'll send you, you know, the good ones. I'm like, no. Can you send me like everything that you feel okay with? And he's like, you want a shot of the outside of a building in a business park in Southern California where the first Blizzard office was? I'm like, yeah, I want that. Yeah, I want a picture of, you know, Alan Adham, who was the founder of Blizzard, you know, and it's now worth, you know, whatever billions of dollars. But, you know, I want a picture of him as a young, you know, 20-ish-year-old kid with the key to the door, putting the key in the door of the Blizzard office for the first time. Yeah, that's cool as hell. Of course I want to show that. And I want to talk with those guys about, you know, the feelings of starting up that sort of thing and show that stuff. And so we do this with Llamasoft, you know, and then our latest interactive documentary, which came out just you know, about a month ago, is Tetris Forever. And very similarly, you know, if there's, you know, a lot of games, we feel like we look at, again, as I was kind of saying, like, we look at a video game, we don't necessarily think of people making this game. I mean, Tetris is as abstract as it gets, right? And so it's hard to even wrap our heads around the idea that a person made this. You know, it seems like it came out of nowhere. But we know who made it. And what I really wanted to do with that was like, let's really tell the story of, you know, who made this, and why, and why did he make this, and what was inspiring him to do this. And so, you know, we find out, if you go through Tetris Forever, you find out that, there were college professors, mathematicians, recreational mathematicians that had studied the phenomenon of what are called polyominoes, which are any shapes that you make by connecting at their edges squares, and they talk about and it all comes from, two squares, right, on top of each other to the side is a domino, and then from there they go to like trimonos, tetrominoes, pentominoes, et cetera, and pentominoes, if you probably have seen at some point in your life a set of pentomino toys, and Alexei Pajitnov, who created Tetris, really loved playing with these pentomino toys that you would take apart, use them to create patterns, and then attempt to put them back into the box, which was like the hardest thing to do with the pentomino toys. And then additionally, so I'm like, all right, well, let me buy a copy of this book. And it's like super rare, out of print, from the 1950s. It then comes out when we're interviewing Alexei for Tetris Forever that he had read this book, that there was a Russian translation of this book, and that he had read it and he had it. And then I flipped to the first page of this book, and on the first page of this book is the author is like, the properties of the pentominoes have been known since antiquity because an ancient master of the game of Go once wrote that there were only X number of ways to arrange 5 Go pieces on a board, and those are equivalent to the pentominoes. And I'm like, God, this is because I knew that Hank Rogers, who was the co-founder of the Tetris company alongside Alexei, he had gotten his start in the Japanese gaming industry by making a game of Go that was playable on the Nintendo Entertainment System. And that he was a big Go guy. And in fact, then I find, of course, a quote from Hank saying, Tetris sort of reminded me of Go in the first place in the way that, and I'm like, of course, this all, it all fits together. And the nice thing is, again, if we were just doing like, here's a bunch of old Tetris games, there would be no way to communicate that to folks. But since we had been sort of working on this interactive documentary concept, we can not only show you that there were people behind these games, but hopefully we can even sort of like teach you something new that you would never even have considered about, Tetris or the game of Go in the first place. And really, I mean, and then, of course, the sort of meta observation here is that since I'm a huge nerd about Japanese video games, like, the story that's in Tetris Forever is very much like it's the story that I wanted to write about Tetris Forever. And so, it's everything from even the retro collection itself, even the sort of the phenomenon of collecting old games into a new game on new hardware. It's like, well, when those come out, you're experiencing what some person decided was important. And so we're really trying to think about like, well, what is important and how can we present, classic games in that way. I literally don't even know what time it is. But yeah, okay. So we have like, 15 minutes left. And I mean, the thought that I thought that I wanted to close on was the ongoing challenge. And the ongoing challenge is this. With Karateka, we knew that even though Prince of Persia is still very top of mind, especially with new releases and stuff like that, like Karateka has kind of been forgotten, by many people, and we really wanted to bring it back. We really wanted to get it back into the conversation as this very important game, because Karateka inspired a generation of like game designers. I mean, there were people who were, we had in the videos, and again, this is another big difference between like an interactive documentary in which we're telling the story of this game versus just like a collection, is that we can kind of expand outwards. So we had John Tobias, who was the co-creator of Mortal Kombat. We had Raph Koster, who was Ultima Online. Talking about how very specifically like Karateka, which was like this movie-like game, really influenced them and got them, thinking about making games. We wish we could have gotten John Romero, who was very inspired by Karateka, but he wasn't able to participate. But losing my train of thought for a second, because we can go out and we can talk about things that are not necessarily like games that you've heard of, and we're trying to get them back into the conversation, right? So we released Tetris Forever. One of the challenges here is, so if you take, for example, in Tetris Forever, the version of Tetris that was released for the family computer, for the 8-bit NES, in Japan. This was the first console version of Tetris released anywhere in the world. It is one of the best-selling games on the Famicom. It was one of the best-selling 8-bit Nintendo games in Japan. It sold, and really it would rank around the world as well, because they sold over 2 million copies, which is like Dragon Quest 3 levels of sales, I think. It's really around there. In Japan, when we put Tetris Forever out in Japan, people were like, oh, great, it's this game I love. It's this game I grew up playing. It's this game I'm very familiar with. Can't wait to play this again. We put it out anywhere but Japan. The reaction to Tetris on the Famicom is, these controls are weird because it doesn't control exactly like we think Tetris should be controlled, because a lot of that, the canonical Tetris console controls come from Nintendo's Game Boy version. The Tetris on the Famicom doesn't control like that. So people are like, these controls are weird. I can't get used to it. And if they even have an opinion about it, because most people's opinion about it is, I don't know what that game is. I've never played it. And so the challenge, what we're struggling with now is, how do we, increase awareness of things that people don't already have like really strong, fun, nostalgic memories of. And I wish I could give you an answer here at this panel, but I really don't have that. But we're trying to do that because there's so much great art out there, so many great games out there that like deserve a second look or deserve to be looked at by an audience that is larger than the audience that initially saw them. And certainly what we're doing is, by telling the stories behind those games, we want you to get more interested in them. It's really interesting to know when you look at Karateka and you see the guy running across the screen. That guy is a real guy whose name is Francis Mechner, who is currently 94 years old, who who got shot at by the Nazis as a child when he was like running to try to escape. It's like, this is a guy, and he lives forever in this little person running along your monitor. But you would never know that unless we were trying to kind of do that work. So that is my winging it version of what I wanted to present to everybody today. So thank you for going along with that. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, also, I should say, I probably also had a slide that says, yes, we do like collections. We've been doing interactive documentaries, and we do original games, such as, if you remember, the PS4 version of Medieval was us. The recent 3D remake of Wizardry was us. And then, of course, released just a few days ago, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind was also Digital Eclipse. Yes. Yes.
How long did it take for Digital Eclipse to make the game of Power Rita's Rewind?
It took a little over a year. Yeah. We worked pretty quickly, and there was definitely a deadline that it was coming out at the end of this year. And so people really, gave it their all to get it out there. Yes.
What was your favorite, behind-the-scenes element?
My favorite behind-the-scenes element of? Just in general? Well, so I talked about Cowabunga Collection and the fact that we do have design documents in there. I mean, it was amazing to me to find out that, because of course I kind of assumed that they didn't have anything, or maybe they had a few things. And as it turns out, Konami was actually amazing at saving all of their old design documents and cataloging them, and they had them all as pieces of paper, like in a facility that they have somewhere in Japan. And we were doing this, it was in the middle of COVID, and there were only certain people that had access to the facility, and we are not one of them, and even our producer at Konami was not one of them. And so we had to get somebody to go over and get into that facility. And so somebody was in there, I guess they were on a Zoom call with our producer, the guy who worked at Konami. And they just start showing him stuff. They're like, what do you want? And he's like, everything. Scan. Because I had told him, like, just everything. Just scan everything. And so they scanned thousands of pages of stuff. And so one of the best days was when I just got an email with a zip file attached to it. And I open up this zip file, and it's just, I mean, again, it's the Turtles games. It's Turtles 2, the arcade game, and Manhattan Project, and Turtles 1, and Turtles on the Game Boy. And opening up the zip file, and just like seeing these folders, and opening up a folder, just clicking on a random image, and just seeing like somebody's extremely detailed design document for a level in a game that I knew very well, because I had played it. That was amazing. And then just realizing the sort of double-edged sort of realization of, oh my God, there's so much to look at. Oh my God, it is my job to take all of this disorganized stuff, figure out what game it came from, and then actually organize it all into, galleries that could be viewed. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. And we put everything in the game. I mean, that was the other thing is that, again, somebody might decide, well, this stuff isn't really interesting because this is just sort of a lot of writing and, we should just pick out a couple of design documents that have funny pictures on them and just put those in. And certainly there are retro collection type products where like that seems to have been what they did. Whereas I was just like, okay, we're talking about some paper that is in Japan, country of earthquakes, country of tsunamis, country of volcanic eruptions, country of God knows what could happen to this. I knew that Konami had even lost stuff in a fire. I'm not saying they're going to lose it in a fire. I'm just saying, like, if it's literally just sitting there as pieces of paper, we have this golden chance right now where we have the Turtles license, we're putting out these games, we can actually make this stuff publicly available. And I pushed really hard and got my way to include absolutely everything. So for Turtles Tournament Fighters, they had sketches of every frame of animation for every fighter. And so we organized all that and put it in. And then, of course, a lot of these design documents they're full of somebody's, the designer's like Japanese handwriting, and it's very chicken scratchy, very small all over the page. And so fortunately, our producer, the guy at Konami, Charles Murakami, is Japanese, reads Japanese, knows Japanese, sat with these. And I know some, but I can't sit there and do this. And we just teamed up, and he basically I'm like, okay. All you have to do is every, like, string of character, every sentence that appears on these things, I said, how did I do this? I said, okay, use PowerPoint and just create a little text box and just type out what you see. Right? And just do that. And then he just sort of sends me PowerPoints where it's like the design document, and then he just created many, many little text boxes all over it with what it said at that point. Because again, it's not written like this. It's like a drawing, and then like, his mask should look like this, with an arrow and like, horizontal or diagonal text. And I'm like, okay, great. Give me that. So then I take this, and then for like the next couple of months of my life, I'm Control-C, Control-V, copying all of the things out of the text boxes into a spreadsheet so that we could then send them and get them all localized, and then assigning each one of them a string, assigning each one of them a little code, right? Then I go to the engineers, and I'm like, okay, can you build me something in the game, into the Cowabunga Collection, like project that we were working on, where I can just click on a part of a document and then put a little float a little window there and then copy and paste a string into that. And they're like, yeah, sure. So we do that. I was like, is that possible? And the engineers are like, is it possible to show a string of text at a given XY location on a screen? Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure they taught me that in, game engineer school. So we do that. And then again, I spend a whole bunch of time going into this tool and then drawing boxes and then pasting the string. And so what we end up with is you can view these design documents, and then you can turn on the layer that shows you what all the text is. And even if you're Japanese, you want this because it's much easier to read a box with actual computer, font text in it than handwriting. And then it's localized into every language the game is localized into. And so instead of just, because I knew that stuff in here was so interesting, and if we just showed you a picture of the design document with a bunch of Japanese on it, it's like, it'd be great if you're living in Japan or if you read Japanese, and kind of useless otherwise. But we we put a lot of work into that because I knew it was so good. And so like that's something that was a thing that I discovered that I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And it's like, okay, let's do the work, to really make this accessible to people. That's the super long answer to your very short question. Anything else? I think we have 1 minute left. If anybody wants to, yes.
Can Digital Eclipse add extra versions of Tetris as DLC to the collection, or does it have to be approved by the Tetris company?
Well, it's not an either or. So yeah, everything would have to be approved by the Tetris company. We certainly, we think it would be great if we can keep supporting Tetris Forever by adding more games. There's going to be some stuff that technologically is not possible. There's going to be some stuff that licensing and rights-wise is not possible. Like, do not hold your breath for any of Nintendo's, games to be in Tetris Forever. But if something, if it hits that Venn diagram of either we're able to, the license makes sense, Tetris company is okay, technologically it's okay, we're looking at stuff that is in the center of that Venn diagram, and we are seeing what we can do. Because we love Tetris Forever, we want to keep supporting Tetris Forever, so, fingers, just pray for us. Hopefully we can continue to add stuff. Yeah. So I think that's it. But thank you very much. I'm gonna go back. I don't know if you saw me at my table. It's full of video games, but it's like it's right at the location of where you go into the vendor floor. So if anybody wants to come and say hello, please do so. But thank you all very much for coming.